The sound of the gavel striking would echo through the dusty town hall of Sweetwater Springs, Texas, in 1873, as Sheriff Tanner announced the commencement of what many locals called the orphan auction. Veronica Hayes stood at the back of the crowded room, her heart breaking as she watched 3 small children huddled together on the crude wooden platform, their faces streaked with tears and dirt. The 2 boys, no more than 7 and 5, stood protectively around their little sister, who couldn't have been older than 3. Starting bid for all 3 orphans is $20, the sheriff called out, his voice betraying a hint of discomfort with the proceedings. Found them in the Dixon homestead after the fever took both parents last week. County can't support them, so we're looking for good homes. Veronica clutched her reticule tightly. As the town's schoolteacher, she knew these children, the Dixon kids. Sweet, bright children who'd suffered unimaginable loss. But on her meager salary, she couldn't possibly afford to take them in, no matter how much her heart yearned to. $10 for the oldest boy, called a gruff voice from the front. Mr. Harrington, the mine owner, always looking for small hands to work his operation. $15 for the girl, countered Mrs. Peterson, who'd lost her own daughter last winter and had a hollow look in her eyes that made Veronica shiver. The middle child, William, began to sob quietly as he realized what was happening. They were being split up. The oldest, James, tightened his grip on his sibling's hands. "I'll give you $8 for the middle one," called another voice, strong enough to help with the cattle. Veronica felt sick. This couldn't be happening. Not in her town. Not to these children. The side door of the town hall burst open, letting in a shaft of blinding sunlight along with the tall, broad-shouldered silhouette of a man. Dust swirled around his boots as he strode purposefully toward the front of the room, spurs jingling with each determined step. "Hold the auction," his deep voice commanded, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Veronica squinted to see who had interrupted. It was Dawson Calloway, the reclusive rancher whose property bordered the northern edge of town. She'd seen him occasionally riding through Sweetwater Springs for supplies, but he rarely stayed longer than necessary, avoiding conversation and keeping to himself. "What's the meaning of this interruption, Calloway?" Sheriff Tanner asked, clearly annoyed at the disruption. Dawson reached the front of the room, standing directly before the platform where the children trembled. His face was partially hidden beneath the brim of his worn leather hat, but Veronica could see his jaw was set in determination. "How much?" Dawson asked simply. "Beg pardon?" the sheriff replied. "How much for all 3 children? Together?" Dawson's voice was firm, brooking no argument. The sheriff looked surprised. "Well, bidding's already started for them separately," I said. Dawson's voice grew quieter, but somehow more powerful. "How much for all 3? Together?" The room fell silent. Even the children stopped crying, watching the tall stranger with wide, hopeful eyes. Sheriff Tanner cleared his throat. "I suppose $40 would cover the county's costs for all 3. Without hesitation, Dawson reached into his pockets, pulling out a leather pouch. He emptied it onto the table before the sheriff. Coins clattered and bills fluttered. He removed his pocket watch, a silver chain, and laid them down too. Then he pulled off his silver belt buckle, adding it to the pile. "That's $36 in cash," Dawson said, his voice steady. "The watch is worth at least 10, and the buckle another 5. That's $51. The crowd murmured in surprise. Veronica found herself moving closer, drawn by this unexpected act of generosity from the man known mostly for his solitude. Sheriff Tanner looked stunned as he counted the money. "This is more than enough, Calloway. But what's a bachelor rancher like you going to do with 3 young children?" Dawson finally lifted his head, and Veronica caught her breath at the intensity in his deep brown eyes. "They stay together," was all he said. Something in Veronica's heart shifted as she watched this rough-hewn man stand up for 3 orphaned children he didn't even know. Before she could stop herself, She stepped forward. "I can help," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. All eyes turned toward her. "I'm their teacher. They know me. I could assist with their care." Dawson's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Veronica felt as though the crowded room had emptied, leaving just the two of them and the three small children whose fate hung in the balance. "Miss Hayes, isn't it?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Yes," she replied, surprised he knew her name. A look passed between them, understanding, gratitude, something unnamed but powerful. "That might be for the best," he admitted. "I don't know much about raising children." The sheriff looked between them, then shrugged. "Well, if you two want to work something out, that's your business. The county's satisfied." He banged his gavel. "Sold to Dawson Calloway." Little Emily, the youngest Dixon child, suddenly broke free from her brother's grip and ran to Veronica, wrapping her arms around the teacher's skirts. James and William followed, clearly relieved to see a familiar face amid the chaos. "What happens now?" James asked quietly, looking between Veronica and the imposing stranger who had just purchased their freedom. Veronica looked up at Dawson, the question hanging between them. "What indeed?" Dawson knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with James. "I've got a ranch about an hour's ride from town. There's plenty of room, fresh air, and no one will separate you three. Miss Hayes here can visit often to help out and make sure you're learning your letters. How does that sound?" The children looked to Veronica for reassurance. She nodded, forcing a smile despite her uncertainty. "Mr. Calloway is being very generous, and I'll visit as often as I can." "Every day?" Emily asked in her small voice. Veronica hesitated, looking at Dawson. His ranch was a fair distance from town. "We'll work something out," Dawson promised, glancing at Veronica with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Maybe Miss Hayes might want to stay in the guest cabin sometimes, if she's willing." The offer hung in the air, laden with implications neither of them was ready to address. Veronica felt a flush creep up her neck, but nodded. "For the children's sake, I would be willing to help however I can." As they left the town hall together, the five of them forming an unlikely procession toward Dawson's wagon, Veronica caught the curious stares of townspeople. She knew what they must be thinking, the reclusive rancher and the spinster schoolteacher, suddenly connected by three orphaned children. What none of them knew, not even Veronica herself, was that this day would mark the beginning of a journey that would change all their lives forever. The ride to Dawson's ranch was quiet, save for the creaking of the wagon wheels and the occasional question from one of the children. Veronica sat with Emily on her lap, the little girl finally succumbing to exhaustion and falling asleep against her chest. The boys, too, fought against drooping eyelids as the rhythmic motion of the wagon lulled them. "They'll need proper beds," Veronica said softly, breaking the silence between her and Dawson, who handled the reins with capable hands. "I've got space," he replied. "The ranch house has 4 bedrooms. Been using one for storage, but it can be cleared out." Veronica studied his profile, strong and weathered by sun and wind. "Why did you do it?" she asked finally. "Buy their freedom like that?" Dawson was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, meant only for her ears. "I was 7 when my parents died of cholera. Had a little brother, Daniel, just 4. We were separated, different families, different towns. Never saw him again." He paused. "Heard he died before he turned 16.
Meaning accident."
Veronica's heart ached at the pain evident in his voice, despite his effort to keep it even. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No child should lose their family twice," he said simply. The ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent, a modest but well-maintained 2-story house, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings, including a small cabin set apart from the main house. It wasn't grand, but it spoke of hard work and care. "Home," Dawson announced, the single word containing a wealth of pride. The children stirred, taking in their new surroundings with wide eyes. As the wagon pulled up to the house, a man emerged from the barn older, with silver hair and a kind face. "That's Chester," Dawson explained. "Ranch foreman. Been with me since I bought this place 6 years ago." Chester approached, his curious expression turning to surprise as he took in the 3 children and Veronica. "Didn't know we were expecting company, boss," he said, his eyes twinkling with good humor. "Neither did I this morning," Dawson replied, jumping down from the wagon and helping Veronica and the children down. "Chester, meet James, William, and Emily Dixon. And this is Miss Veronica Hayes, the town schoolteacher." Chester's eyebrows rose, but to his credit, he simply tipped his hat. "Pleasure to meet you all. Especially you, Miss Hayes. Boss has mentioned you before." Veronica couldn't help the flutter in her chest at those words, or the way Dawson shot Chester a warning look. "The children will be staying with us," Dawson explained. "They've lost their parents, and we're keeping them together." Chester's expression softened as he looked at the 3 small faces. "Well now, that's a fine thing. We've got plenty of room and food to share, don't we, boss?" "That we do," Dawson agreed. "Miss Hayes will be helping with their care. She'll stay in the guest cabin when she's here." "I should return to town tonight," Veronica said, suddenly aware of how improper this arrangement might appear. "I have school tomorrow." "It'll be dark soon," Dawson pointed out. "Stay tonight. I'll drive you back at first light." Veronica hesitated, then looked at the children. Emily was clutching her hand tightly, fear evident in her small face at the prospect of Veronica leaving. "All right," she agreed. "Just for tonight." That night, after a simple but hearty meal prepared by Chester, who proved to be an excellent cook, Veronica helped settle the exhausted children into makeshift beds. Dawson had cleared out the storage room with remarkable efficiency, and Chester had found extra blankets and pillows to make comfortable pallets until proper beds could be arranged. "Will you tell us a story, Miss Hayes?" William asked as she tucked the blankets around him. Veronica smiled and sat on the edge of the bed. "Just one short one, then sleep." She was midway through a tale about a brave rabbit when she realized Dawson was standing in the doorway, listening. His presence filled the room, though he made no sound. His eyes, usually so guarded, watched her with the children, and something in his expression made her heart skip. When the story was finished and the children were drifting off to sleep, Veronica quietly left the room, finding herself alone with Dawson in the hallway. "You're good with them," he said softly. "I've been teaching for 5 years," she replied. "Children respond to kindness and consistency." "Something I'll need to learn," he admitted. "Why did you tell the sheriff I could help? We barely know each other." Dawson looked down for a moment, then met her eyes directly. "I've seen you with the children at school. Watched sometimes, riding past. You care about them, all of them, not just the ones from wealthy families." Veronica was surprised. "I didn't know you paid attention." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I pay attention to things that matter, Miss Hayes." The air between them seemed to grow thicker, charged with something Veronica wasn't ready to name. She took a step back. "I should retire. If you'll show me to the cabin." Dawson nodded, leading her outside into the cool evening air. The guest cabin was small but clean, with a comfortable bed, a small stove, and basic furnishings. "It's not fancy," he apologized, "but it's private." "It's perfect," she assured him. "Thank you for your kindness today, Mr. Calloway." He lingered at the door. "Dawson," he corrected gently. "If we're going to be raising 3 children together, you might as well use my given name." "Veronica, then," she offered in return. His eyes softened. "Good night, Veronica." "Good night, Dawson." As she closed the door behind him, Veronica leaned against it, her heart racing with the enormity of what had happened today. 3 orphan children, a reclusive rancher, and her, somehow in the middle of it all. What had she gotten herself into? The next morning dawned bright and clear. Veronica woke to the sounds of ranch life already in full swing, distant cattle lowing, chickens clucking, the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood. She dressed quickly and made her way to the main house, where she found Chester preparing breakfast while the children sat at the table, looking more rested but still uncertain in their new surroundings. "Good morning, Miss Hayes," Chester greeted her cheerfully. "Coffee's hot, and flapjacks are coming right up." "Thank you, Chester," she replied, accepting a cup of strong, black coffee. "Where's Mr. Calloway?" "Boss is out checking the north pasture. Said to tell you he'd be back to take you to town after breakfast." Emily brightened when she saw Veronica, rushing to hug her around the waist. "Are you going to stay with us, Miss Hayes?" Veronica smoothed the child's tangled hair. "I have to teach school, sweetheart. But I'll visit often, I promise." "Who's going to take care of us when you're gone?" William asked, his young face serious. "Mr. Calloway and Chester will take good care of you," Veronica assured him, though she wondered herself how Dawson planned to manage 3 young children while running a ranch. James, the oldest and most perceptive, watched her with knowing eyes. "You'll come back, won't you? You promise?" "I promise," Veronica said firmly. "You 3 are very important to me." The sound of boots on the porch announced Dawson's return. He entered the kitchen, bringing with him the scent of horses and open air. His eyes found Veronica immediately, and something in her responded to his gaze like a flower turning toward the sun. "Morning," he said, removing his hat. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance, her hair hastily pinned, her dress from yesterday slightly wrinkled. After breakfast, the moment came to return to town. The goodbye was harder than Veronica had anticipated. Emily clung to her, crying, while the boys tried to be brave but looked devastated. 3 days, Dawson said quietly as he helped her into the wagon. "Give me 3 days to get them settled, and then I'll bring them to town to see you. We can work out a schedule then." Veronica nodded gratefully. "Thank you." The ride to town was filled with practical discussion, what the children would need, their schooling, their health. By the time they reached Sweetwater Springs, Veronica felt they had formed a tentative partnership. "I'll see you in 3 days then," she said as he helped her down from the wagon outside the small boarding house where she rented a room. Dawson held her hand a moment longer than necessary. 3 days, he confirmed, his eyes conveying something his words did not. As he drove away, Veronica was aware of curious glances from townsfolk passing by. By noon, she knew, the entire town would be buzzing with the news of Dawson Calloway's orphans and the schoolteacher's involvement. She straightened her shoulders and headed inside. Let them talk. Those children needed them, and that was all that mattered. True to his word, Dawson brought the children to town 3 days later. Veronica was teaching when they arrived, and the delight on her students' faces at seeing their classmates return was heartwarming. After school, Dawson invited her to dinner at the town's only restaurant, a simple establishment that nonetheless represented luxury in Sweetwater Springs. "They've settled in well," he told her as they watched the children devour apple pie. "James has taken to helping Chester with the chickens. William follows me everywhere, asking questions about the cattle. And Emily." His voice softened. "She's found a kitten in the barn. Named it Sunny." Veronica smiled. "They're resilient, but they still need structure, education, a woman's influence." "I was thinking," Dawson said carefully, "maybe you could stay at the ranch Friday through Sunday each week. I could bring you back for school on Monday mornings." It was a generous offer and a practical solution. Still, Veronica hesitated. "People will talk." Dawson's gaze was steady. "Let them. We know the truth, we're doing right by these children." And so a pattern was established. Weekdays, the children stayed at the ranch with Dawson and Chester, learning the rhythms of ranch life. Weekends, Veronica joined them, bringing books and lessons, feminine guidance, and a growing sense of stability. As spring turned to summer, The arrangement evolved naturally. Dawson built proper beds for the children. Veronica brought curtains for their windows, books for their shelves. The guest cabin gradually accumulated her belongings, a shawl draped over a chair, favorite books stacked by the bed, dried flowers in a jar on the table. What also grew, quietly but undeniably, was the connection between Veronica and Dawson. Their conversations, at first centered entirely on the children, gradually expanded to include their own lives, hopes, and memories. She learned about his difficult childhood after his parents' death, his determination to build something of his own. He discovered her love of poetry, her dream of someday starting a proper school building in Sweetwater Springs. One warm evening in late July, nearly 3 months after the auction, Veronica sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset while the children played in the yard. Dawson joined her, offering a glass of lemonade. "They're happy," he observed, watching James teach his siblings a game involving a ball and makeshift targets. "They are," she agreed. "You've given them a wonderful home." "We have," he corrected gently. "I couldn't have done this without you, Veronica." She turned to look at him, struck by the openness in his expression. Gone was the guarded recluse who had burst into the auction months ago. In his place was a man transformed by responsibility and, perhaps, something more. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his voice lower now. "The school term ends next month." "Yes," she acknowledged, wondering where this was leading. What if you didn't go back to the boarding house afterward? What if you stayed here, permanently? Veronica's heart began to race. "Dawson, are you asking?" "I'm asking if you would consider making this arrangement permanent. For the children's sake, of course," he added quickly, though his eyes told a different story. "For the children," she repeated softly. "And perhaps," he continued, his voice rough with emotion, "for other reasons as well." Before she could respond, Emily called out, wanting to show them a cartwheel she'd learned. The moment passed, but Veronica felt its weight remain, a beautiful possibility hovering between them. The following weekend brought a summer thunderstorm that kept everyone indoors. After the children were in bed, Veronica found herself alone with Dawson in the main room, the only light coming from the fireplace and a single lamp. "You never answer my question," he said quietly, pouring her a small glass of sherry. "About staying permanently." Veronica accepted the glass, using a moment to gather her thoughts. It would cause talk in town. An unmarried woman living at a bachelor's ranch, even with children present. "And if I weren't a bachelor?" he asked, his eyes never leaving hers. The air seemed to still around them. "What are you saying, Dawson?" He set down his glass and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "I'm saying that these past months have shown me something I never expected to find. A family. A home that's more than just a house and land." He took her hand. "And feelings I thought I'd buried long ago." Veronica's breath caught. "Dawson, I know this started because of the children," he continued. "But it's grown into something else, hasn't it? At least for me." "For me as well," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. His hand, rough from years of ranch work, gently touched her cheek. "Then marry me, Veronica. Not just for the children, though they need us both. Marry me because I've fallen in love with you, with your kindness, your strength, your heart." Tears filled Veronica's eyes. "Are you certain? This is happening so fast." "Some things don't need time," he said simply. "Some things you just know." She thought of the day at the auction, how something had passed between them, even then a recognition, a beginning. "Yes," she said finally, her heart full. "Yes, I'll marry you." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that had been building between them for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the connection between them felt unbreakable. "The children will be overjoyed," she said, smiling through her tears. "They've been conspiring to make this happen for weeks," Dawson chuckled. "James asked me last Sunday when I was going to make you their mother properly." Veronica laughed. "Clever boy." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Sweetwater Springs. The children stood beside them, beaming with pride and joy. Chester served as best man, while Veronica's fellow teacher, Sarah Matthews, was her maid of honor. The town, which had indeed buzzed with gossip about their unusual arrangement, now celebrated the union that seemed, in retrospect, inevitable. The orphans who had faced separation at auction had not only stayed together, but had created a new family, bringing together two souls who might otherwise have remained alone. That evening, after a small reception at the ranch attended by friends and neighbors, Veronica and Dawson stood on the porch of their home, watching the children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I never imagined this," Dawson said, his arm around his new wife's waist. "When I rode into town that day, I just wanted to stop an injustice. I never thought I'd find everything," Veronica finished for him. "I know. Neither did I." He turned her to face him, his expression serious. "I emptied my pockets at that auction to keep those children together. But what I got in return—" His voice grew husky with emotion. "What we found together, it's worth more than all the gold in California." Veronica reached up to touch his face, marveling at how this man had transformed from the taciturn stranger at the auction to the loving husband and father before her. "From emptied pockets to full hearts," she murmured. "A fair trade," he agreed, lowering his lips to hers as the sun set on their first day as husband and wife, the laughter of their children, for they were truly theirs now, creating the perfect music for their new beginning. 5 years later, the Calloway ranch had flourished along with its inhabitants. James, now 12, had grown into a responsible young man who helped his father with the increasingly successful cattle operation. William, 10, showed a remarkable aptitude for working with horses, while Emily, 8, was the undisputed princess of the household, especially after the birth of her little sister, Hope, 2 years earlier. Veronica had realized her dream of establishing a proper school building in Sweetwater Springs, teaching there 3 days a week while caring for her growing family. Her newest blessing was growing beneath her heart another child, due to arrive before Christmas. The ranch itself had expanded, with more cattle, better buildings, and even a few hired hands to help with the work. Chester remained, now more like a beloved uncle to the children than an employee. On the anniversary of the day they'd met at the auction, Dawson and Veronica made a tradition of sitting on the porch after the children were asleep, remembering how their family had begun. "Do you ever regret it?" Veronica asked, her head resting on her husband's shoulder as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "Taking on 3 orphans when you were a confirmed bachelor?" Dawson's laugh was warm and genuine. "Not for a single moment. Best decision I ever made." He placed his hand gently on her growing belly. "It led me to you, to all of this. From an auction block to a family," Veronica mused. "Life takes strange and wonderful turns." "Speaking of turns," Dawson said, reaching into his pocket, "I have something for you." He placed a small velvet box in her hand. Opening it, Veronica gasped at the sight of a delicate gold locket. "Open it," he encouraged. Inside was a tiny portrait of all 3 Dixon children, taken shortly after they'd come to live at the ranch. On the opposite side was a newer image, Hope, their first child together. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "There's room for one more picture," Dawson said, touching her stomach gently, "for when this little one arrives." As the stars shone down on their home, a home built on compassion, sacrifice, and love, Veronica thought of the desperate orphans and the solitary rancher who had emptied his pockets to keep them together. She thought of the lonely schoolteacher she had been, yearning for a family of her own. None of them were lonely anymore. They had found in each other exactly what they needed, not just shelter or provision, but love, belonging, and the unbreakable bonds of family. "I love you, Dawson Calloway," she whispered, leaning into his embrace. Thank you for being the kind of man who would empty his pockets for 3 orphaned children. And I love you, Veronica Calloway, he replied, his voice rich with emotion. Thank you for helping me fill this house with love. Their lips met in a tender kiss, sealing once again the promise they had made not just to each other, but to the children who had brought them together. A promise of love, commitment, and family that would endure for all their days.